Okay, good afternoon and welcome to our weekly funding update with our resident funding experts David Marshall and Nick Rotton. Thanks for joining me again, guys, this week. I know there's not a lot to report on this week, but just really would like to get your feeling for what you're seeing on the ground, how things have changed now we've had a whole week at the new regime since the government really intervened and asked the banks to speed things up and get the money out to businesses. So what changes have you seen, if any?
Okay, I suppose at the back end of last week we saw some new lenders being accredited and joining the scheme. Starling Bank, Co-op, Synergy Bank and Oak North. So on the face of things, that's really good news. On the other side of that particular coin, Starling Bank aren't yet accepting applications. The Co-op banks say their application is available on the website. I've not had a chance to have a look for it yet. Synergy Bank, which was formerly Bank of Cyprus, they're not yet open for applications, and Oak North Bank are open for applications from their existing customers, but their minimum loan size is £500,000.
Wow.
So if you are already with Oak North, then and you want £500,000 or more, you're in with a chance. But at the moment, I don't see that those changes in terms of the new lenders actually changing things a great deal for most SMEs. There are some other lenders that were sort of partially in the scheme, in as much as they were part of the old EFG scheme and now being accredited for CBILs. That's Arkle Finance, Secure Trust, Coutts and Close Brothers. But three of those four are largely asset finance lenders rather than term debt for businesses. So perhaps a little bit disappointing we've not seen some of the larger players from the peer-to-peer and alternative finance market stepping in. We know that Funding Circle have made it quite public that they've applied. It'll be interesting to see if their application is successful, because that would actually make a difference to a lot of businesses potentially. We hear from the British Chamber of Commerce about 5,000 applications have been made. A relatively small percentage, 5,000 applications have been agreed, but that's a relatively small percentage of the total number that have been actually applied for, applications that have gone in. We're not quite sure at this stage what percentage have been declined and what number are still in process. So it's still kind of early days in that sense.
So when you say a small percentage have been agreed, have you got any feeling for what that percentage is?
Not in front of me at the moment. No, it's a small number. It's single figures.
Okay, right. Okay.
Yes.
And I suppose to be fair, the scheme's not been open that long and there was an enormous influx of applications, weren't there?
Yeah, that's right. So a lot of applications, although they may not have been agreed, I don't think they're necessarily declined. I think they're just in the system.
Okay. So that's good to hear. And have you seen any evidence of when the bank intervened, it was a week and a half ago now, sorry, the government intervened and said, you've got to make this quicker and you've got to get the money to the companies. Have you seen any shift? Have you seen the banks doing anything more quickly, any differently?
I can't say we've seen anything, but I think the volume of applications has probably been that great. It's probably like a tidal wave, so that any small improvement that they are making is almost being counteracted by the volume of applications. So I think it's more an issue with volume.
I think the other thing to mention is clearly with the announcement that suddenly the withdrawal of the personal guarantee may have sparked another wave of applications for people that perhaps weren't keen, that now think, well, actually, I might now apply, and you had a second wave of interest, which creates another challenge for the high street or the lenders that are on CBILs at the moment.
And is it still very much the case that priority is being given to existing customers? So we're still recommending people don't look to go to a new bank?
Yeah, definitely. Your best chance is to stick with the original bank, approach your original bank. I mean, some of the aggravation that goes along with changing banks, particularly when there's security involved, and if that security is in the form of property, moving that security at the moment is probably just going to take weeks and weeks. In fact, probably, Nick, when it comes to property, what's happening in terms of property funding at the moment?
Well, to be fair, the big challenge for anyone in the property marketplace at the moment is valuations. So the fundamental is that we can't get valuers out. So we're sitting in and I think actually there was a phrase used by someone today that made me that's put the panic in. So basically, lenders are receiving, if they are getting a valuation, all they're getting is a valuation with a phrase, and I'm just going to, sorry, I'm cutting slightly, but the material valuation uncertainty is being now required to be put in by the RICS, which is, of course, the valuation body, because they can't get the true comparables or the situation in terms of what the property market is. And as a consequence, lenders are going, well, with that in front of us, what value do we give to the asset that we've got? So we're kind of in a holding pattern on the property side.
Okay.
Which so the reality is, so coming to reinforcing David's point, existing bank has to be your first priority, and then if rather than look at another bank, it's to then look at the alternate finance options, because they will be probably quicker, and they will probably look at it as a side lending to your main banking facilities. So there's less complication or delay.
Right. Okay.
If number one doesn't work.
Okay, makes sense.
I think it also, just to emphasise the point that with your existing bank being your best source of funding, it's worth taking extra care to get the application right, to spend the time over it, not provide the bank with what you think the bank wants, but look at what the bank's asking for. There's a lot of guidance on the bank's own websites, but also around generally on what the bank's looking for, and make sure you're ticking all those boxes. It's just so important, because the last thing you want to do is get thrown out of the system, go to the bottom of the queue again with your last piece of information, and have to join the queue again at the back.
Yeah, we talked a lot about this last week, didn't we? The fact that if if people's applications aren't going in fully thought through, they haven't given all the information, and also give them the extra information. Tell them the assumptions. Tell them what you're working to. I mean, you've got to give them everything they can to make that decision, haven't you? I mean, have you got any feeling on approval time at the moment? Or does it really vary?
I think it varies. Some of the application that went in very early were turned around, and I think in the press now we're seeing, particularly some of the larger deals being touted as big successes. So we know that some of the loans are being made and they were turned around quite quickly. I think the huge wave of tidal wave of applications is actually going through the system probably at the moment and over the next week or two.
Yeah.
So nothing more recent. I have heard indications being given of maybe 2-3 weeks, but then from other banks we heard of 8 and 12. So anywhere between the two.
I think it's interesting, after the government intervention, there were like some sudden flurries of 2 days for approval, and things got turned around in 3 or 4 days. But I don't think that's typical at all, do you?
No,
there are some weeks for approval, right?
When the banks are under a lot of pressure from the government, they do try and react. Well, they try and react anyway, but particularly when it's in the press. And they will get some loans approved, and they will get them out there, and they will publicise them.
Yes.
Because they feel they need to do that.
Yeah,
but
of course.
The vast volume of loans are just going through the system in the normal way.
It's we're not looking to decry the banks, but you are trying to turn a super tanker,
of course,
in terms of process, and in terms of the way a bank goes through an application process. So trying to turn that super tanker in a week is a significant change, especially when you add in that you're probably bringing in people that aren't necessarily full-time underwriters or processors in that regard, because of the volume of applications they're getting. Sure. I'm not here to try and justify it, but that's the reality probably going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
In amongst the big lenders.
So I think, as we were saying last week, we still need to be thinking of backup plans. We still need to be not assuming you're going to get your money or that you're going to get it quickly. So people need it for April payroll, which is only like 10 to 15 days away. Really be thinking about how you're going to fund that. And like I say, maybe some of these second tier lenders could be an alternative.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. I have to say, this is anecdotal, but we had actually 2 individual phone calls on Thursday evening from people in the group who were saying they'd had some quite weary conversations with their relationship manager. Managers were pretty beaten down by it all, and they'd said to them that they didn't really have much of an appetite to write this low margin work, and even though they were viable, they didn't know if they'd be able to help them. And so there's a little bit of a rumbling of that. I didn't know whether you'd come across that or not.
I've come across the fact that they're rushed off their feet and they're busy and they're feeling a bit ground down. And apart from all the issues they've got on the customer side, obviously the banks are going through a lot of internal change, and there's a lot of internal stuff going on as well, which you kind of expect. But I think anybody that's got a strong or a valid case, I still think they're going to get a good hearing. I think maybe that's just perhaps a few managers that perhaps feel they know their clients quite well, probably talking about how they feel rather than the bank's appetite.
Okay.
I suppose the other point that's perhaps worth making is that they are being asked to tick these through fairly quickly. But at the end of the day, while the pressure now is on getting these loans approved, and they will be doing their best to do that, in due course, when some of these businesses fall over and the guarantee is called upon, then everybody's got all the time in the world to forensically go through the application process to make sure that everything was done properly. And it may be that in the past, where the government's provided these guarantees, they turn around and they say, well, actually that wasn't quite right, and you didn't tick that box and you didn't ask for that piece of information, so we're not going to pay up under the guarantee.
Yeah.
So there's another side to this, and of course that's all very easy to do in 9 months' time when a business has failed, and there's all the time in the world. Whereas at the moment they're just trying to process these applications as quickly as possible.
Yeah. And obviously Rishi announcing at the briefing yesterday about going kind of on the record, if you like, about the depth of the recession that's coming. Do you think that's going to alter bank appetite or banks' underwriting view?
Well, I suppose if anybody put an application in that said that it's going to be a relatively short downturn and the economy is going to bounce back straight away, and it's on that basis is the only way that they have a business that's able to service their existing and their new debt going forward, then they're going to look quite marginal as soon as you say, well, maybe we've got 3 months and then a 3-month recovery and then going into a deep recession or a recession after that. So you're not going to go back to your 2019 levels of trading. And if that means that your application looks that much weaker, then some cases are probably going to fall by the wayside on that basis.
Yes.
So
again, be realistic with your assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. Be realistic and argue your case.
Yeah.
Because if you're in a particular sector or a subsector which isn't going to be so affected, then argue that case. Why it won't be affected. Give the banks that information, because otherwise, I think we've come back to almost a starting point of view of 3 months, depending on what your business is, but potentially 3 months of nearly nothing going on, and then a recovery over the following 3 months. But then just got to be realistic about what the recovery level builds up to. It's perhaps not going to be for everybody what it was in 2019.
Yeah. Well, I think it could well be that 2021 is before we start to see a recovery happening. Depending on how long the lockdown. We just don't know, do we? We don't know any of these answers yet.
No, and I think to be fair, as long as you, it comes back to what we talked about last week and what we've already mentioned today, is explain your assumptions within that cash flow and to prove your serviceability, to prove your business plan, in your own mind, for your own benefit as much as it is for the banks. There's no point going into this thinking that you're going to be, being able to pay everything in 3 months' time from trade, because clearly that's unlikely.
Yeah.
And that's not helping you or your business any more than it's helping the bank trying to make a decision. So, you've got to look at it from the point of view almost of, would I lend me money based on this bit of paper? Yeah. And if you're looking at it going, well, I don't know, you can guarantee a bank's probably doing the same.
Yeah.
So be realistic with yourself. It's what you talk about all the time, Serena, on, in other situations. You've got to be realistic with that cash flow, because if you're not, you're creating yourself a problem in 3 months or 6 months' time anyway.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
So I think that's the important point from what's come out of yesterday's sort of from the Chancellor, is that be harder on those cash flow numbers, be harder on the assumptions, and push everything back a bit further. Does it still work?
Yeah.
If you can show that, the bank will almost be expecting that now, and will be will be able to mitigate that through the process.
Mm.
The fundamentals are that the Bank of England will give 12 months worth of interest payments anyway.
Yep.
So build that into your cash flow, and then push everything back further to sort of show that the reality is, achievable.
Yeah, very good point there. Thank you for that. And I know, David, you mentioned before we started the call about the furlough payments. They've actually announced the date of the portal being launched, haven't they?
Yes. So the portal opens on the 20th. That's next Monday.
Yeah.
It's going to be open 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's been built to handle 450,000 users per hour. Let's hope it does that. That'll be a stretch for the IT to handle, but HMRC are fairly confident they can manage that. And I think that, assuming the IT holds up, for anybody that can actually get into the system and log their system online and they don't need any support, it may well work pretty well for them. They have brought extra staff in, but I think anybody that needs to phone up the helpline to get their application through, they're probably going to have difficulties. So I think it's read through whatever information's available in terms of instructions and how to prepare your application, read that through beforehand as much as you can, rather than getting into the system and finding you've hit the buffers and then you need to speak to somebody, because I think then you're probably going to have a problem. Good news on the payment side, though, they are saying that anybody who gets an application in on the 20th should make a payment for the 30th of April.
Wow,
I think a
good news.
lot of us were thinking it might be mid-May before those payments came out.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, I know it's cutting it really fine, but people might just make April payroll if they can get in, but they shouldn't bank on that, should they? Because
no, don't bank on
it.
No.
But it is, I mean, certainly like even a week or two can make an enormous difference at this stage to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the good news, other good news is, I think in the, after the first wave's gone through, they've said their business as usual would be a turnaround between 4 and 6 days.
Okay.
So again, that's better than we anticipated.
And presumably people can be claiming for their March and their April payroll at this stage, can't they? Or maybe not April.
Yeah, maybe not
Maybe
April.
their March payroll, can't they, on the 20th?
Yeah.
And they can claim their April one as soon as they've run the April one.
Well, the pressure should be off then, shouldn't it? So,
yeah. I'm just seeing I have an update on that client who'd had difficulty with their bank. He hasn't put his application in yet. It really put him off, actually. So,
well, if, as I said, if anybody wants us to look over an application, provided we're not inundated, I'm quite happy to do that for nothing and just give a view on where I think it's strong, where it's maybe not so strong.
Thanks for that. I appreciate that. Anything else to say?
No, I think that's.
Yeah, there's still a little bit of talk about what other changes we might see. There's still some talk about the gaps for the young growing businesses that perhaps weren't able to show that they were viable at December 19, but actually chances are they have got a good future to them. Perhaps a lot of investments being put in. That's still being debated, and that if some support does materialise for that, it might be a combination of government support and private investment.
Right.
But as soon as you mention private investment as well, then I think the timescales get pushed back quite a long way.
Yeah.
And there's still pressure, although I don't really think anything will come of this unless there's a real problem with the banks getting the scheme to work properly, to match the likes of Switzerland and some of the other countries where there's 100% government guarantee. And their process is, it's just being like the money's been flying out the door there. It's been very successful, but I don't think the government will want to go to that step if there's an option not to.
I would hope. We know that 80%. So that was I'm with you. Yeah, because they've got to protect the floodgates somehow, haven't they? Because they've still got to get paid for.
Yes,
banks have got
that's right.
risks, and it's increased the taxpayers' load a lot.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that was helpful. Thank you very much. And so we'll talk again next week, see if things are. I mean, by hopefully next week we should be seeing more people getting paid out. Hopefully, more loans getting approved, because we've certainly in our group we've not heard really of. There's maybe been 1 or 2 people had their loans approved, but very few. As a straw sort of 3,000 members, we've got very few people had anything approved yet.
Yeah, I think we'll start to see both more approvals, and then we'll also start to see a clearer picture of what's potentially being declined and
Yes.
the reason behind those, and then you'll start to get a better idea of what sort of things people aren't doing or we're missing the opportunities of. I think that's kind of what we're going to start to see a little bit more of.
And I think as we sort of unfold through the rest of April, people who managed to limp their way through March and most of April, I think we're going to see people going into crisis mode, I think, quite quickly. If funds aren't forthcoming from the bank, I think we're going to see, you know, people in this kind of holding pattern, haven't they, for the last few weeks. There's only so long you can sustain that if you haven't got cash behind you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think we'll see things start to change quite a lot, I guess, over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think Robin might start to find himself getting busier.
Yes, I think he might. Definitely. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. Very, very much appreciated as always. And I'll just stop the recording.